So good afternoon from London, but I know we have a very global audience joining us today. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. And welcome to today's webinar, which is called Harnessing the Digital Potential of Government Services. I'm Siobhan Bonita. I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar today on behalf of Global Government Forum, it's a publishing house that serves civil servants all around the world. And I'd also like to thank our knowledge partners today, that's SAP and DXC Technology. Now, in terms of today's topic, so governments worldwide are modernising and digitalising their public services in order to make their own processes more efficient, but also to respond to the changing expectations of the public, many of whom want quick and easy access to their government services online. The public sector, however, has specific challenges that can really slow down that digital transformation progress, including, for example, financial constraints, old and siloed systems, the lack of digital skills in their workforce, and resistance to change. So in today's webinar, we're going to explore some of the things that governments are already doing to overcome some of those barriers and to ensure that they have deliverable plans for digital transformation, that they really do create those integrated and seamless services which work across departmental silos, and crucially that they put the user, the citizen, at the heart of their policy and service design. We have three great speakers with us here today, and in a moment I'm going to introduce our speakers and invite them to give some opening remarks. But the webinar is all about you and your questions, really. So once our speakers have done their opening remarks, you can message in your questions. So on your device, whichever device you are using, you should see a Q&A function, a Q&A button somewhere. At any point from now on, please use that Q&A button to message in your questions. And as I say, we'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of today's webinar. So now to our great panel. So first we will hear from David Dinsdale, who is Industry Value Advisor at our knowledge partner SAP. And David has worked on the creation of digital services with millions of users, as well as advising government organisations on how to get the most benefit from technology change. He's worked in central government, local government, health and defence, and has a wealth of experience on what works well and what doesn't work so well regarding digital transformation in public services. Then we will hear from James Piat, who is Product Lead at the Central Digital and Data Office in the Cabinet Office here in the United Kingdom. James leads work on the end-to-end transformation of priority public services across central government, ranging everything from voter registration to flood warnings. Now, these top 75 priority services collectively manage over 280 million annual transactions with citizens, businesses and civil servants. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from James in his opening remarks. Prior to this, he has delivered transformation programmes in the Home Office and the Department for Work and Pensions. And then we will head over to Iceland, where we hear from Vigdis Johansdóttir, who is Chief Marketing Officer for Digital Iceland, where she leads internal and external communication, branding, culture, education and strategy. Vigdis began her career in media, where her focus was on branding and communication for both television and radio, as well as producing and hosting TV shows. So as an experienced strategist, she has been with Digital Iceland since spring of 2020, taking part in building its strategy and being instrumental in growing the impact of Digital Iceland with a special focus on the change management needed for the project to succeed. Unfortunately, you might have seen we were also expecting Carlos Santizo to join us from the OECD, but sadly, Carlos has had an emergency today, so he is unable to join us. But I'm sure if you had any questions specifically that you wanted to put to Carlos, put them to our other speakers, and I'm sure we will be able to cover those as well. As I say, do send in as many questions as you can using that Q&A function, but without further ado, I'm going to head over to David and invite him to give the first of our opening remarks. Over to you, David.
Great, Siobhan. Thank you very much and welcome everyone. Looking forward to this session and looking forward to sharing and learning with everyone on the call. To begin, I'd like to tell a four-part story The first part around the digital evolution of public services in the UK, of which I have been part of various different times in my career. Then have a look at a couple of innovative case studies, which I thought would help with the discussion, and then give some reflections and lessons learned. And if you were asking me to summarize in a slide what my comments and recommendations would be, then that will be the fourth part of the story. So if we can move to the first slide, please. Thank you. So I've described the journey for the UK, and this is very much a personal view as opposed to a government view, and I'll explain my role in it as we go, as I go through the conversation. I think of it in four stages: the dash for digital, the rationalization, the focus on the user front end, and then a focus on process centricity and end-to-end services. So just running through those quickly. So around about 2000, 2004, there was a government initiative to digitize everything. So there was this really focused efforts to get everything digital. It led to quite a lot of government-centric thinking, a proliferation of websites, and a lot of PDF forms. And I'm sure these kind of initiatives are well known to people on this call, and that you've been through a similar journey yourself as public services look to go digital. Then we went through a rationalization phase where there was a review in 2006 led by a gentleman called Sir David Varney, and he did a review of service transformation. And he said, no, what we need is a more user-centric view of this. And so his recommendation was to set up 3 services or expand 3 services: Direct Gov for citizens, Business Link for businesses, and NHS Choices for health. And my role there was between 2006 and 2011, I was the program director for Business Link. So it was less websites and the beginning of the citizen and business-centric thinking. Then we moved on with the formation of government digital services to a more unified front end, gov.uk. They did the gov.uk team did and do a phenomenal job of providing a single entry point for services, focusing on the user experience, focusing on the user, the citizen, and the business. And that is now moving on to a process-centric approach. And I'll leave the later conversation around how government is progressing to James, who will speak immediately after me. But that's kind of the journey. So it was a dash for digital. It was like, oh, we've kind of forgotten that we're trying to deliver things for users. So let's rationalize, then let's focus on the front end, and then let's focus on the end-to-end services. If we were going to say, well, what have we learned from that? I think it's that quote at the bottom: think process first. And the future very much of public services in the digital area is around those processes. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is focus just on a subset of a case study that I thought was really interesting. And this is with Christchurch City Council in New Zealand and the story of their Intelligent Citizen Service Delivery program. So what they've done is they've brought together a single digital service. It combines 15 different lines of business, and very much as Siobhan said at the beginning, the objective of digital services to make it quick and easy to access services. Christchurch were looking to make their services simpler and more intuitive. So they have a really good digital service that you would expect, but there are a couple of things that I thought were really nifty about this case study that I think lend themselves to a conversation about the future. The first is that through the portal, what you're able to get is real-time progress for in-process and in-flight public services for citizens and staff. And that's definitely an emerging theme across all of the public sector that we look at. It's not just about signing up for something and then filing a form and then it disappearing into a black hole. It's around making sure that the end-to-end process is served and people can understand where they are within that process steps as we go through a particular process. The second thing was their use of technology. So and there's a theme here, particularly, I know we have quite a few policy staff on the webinar today, and there's a theme here for policy staff, which is how do you define services that can handle technology innovation? And there are many areas that I'm dealing with in the UK where we're struggling with digital innovation, not because we can't innovate, but because laws, for example, might define the way that certain services may have to be delivered. And in a situation where you can't anticipate technology innovation, that then causes problems because it means you can't use innovation. So some of the nifty things that I thought about Christchurch City Council was their use of geospatial capabilities to be able to say, you know, I want to report graffiti or a particular incident in a particular location. So you can do that. And the reporting process will geolocate you to where the issue is, and you can then photograph the issue, and so that it becomes very efficient for public servants resolving those. And the same with predictive analytics. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. If we move on to the next slide, please. So again, Brussels Smart City, so serving 1.5 million citizens. And again, they have a really competent digital front end to the city region for those 1.5 million citizens. But they were doing something really nifty with their Smart Move program. So basically using GPS tracking to look at how you can manage a low emission zone, but using GPS tracking rather than saying if you come into the zone, you get charged. If you stay out of the zone, you don't get charged. And this motivates people, I think, to align more with the policy initiatives, which is to improve air quality. It makes it more affordable for citizens, which at the moment is really key, aligns to those policy outcomes and has the end-to-end automated data collection and billing. So on both of those case studies, there are links on the slides if you want to have a look if those are of interest. If we move to the next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is a quick run round these 4 reflections. So these are the thoughts that I would like to leave you with and potentially debate through the Q&A. So when it comes to a better experience for users, think process first when designing services, particularly if processes span organizational boundaries. If you focus on the process, you'll come up with a better service for the users rather than saying, oh, department A needs to do this and department B needs to do that. Using data to predict service entitlement and behavior, so eligibility for services and propensity to pay, really important. Moving on to that bottom left box, operating model drives efficiency. So cost to serve is really important. Real-time status updates for citizens and staff can prevent you driving traffic into your contact centers, which is a significant cost to many public service organizations. And focusing on impact using predictive analytics to say who needs our help rather than providing a generic help to everyone, and bearing in mind that processes are living things. On innovation, the examples that I've given, looking to exploit technology, fantastic use of technology by both Christchurch and Brussels City region, increasing the innovation speed using pre-built frameworks and maturity assessments. So if you're starting on this journey and you're thinking, where am I and where do I need to go? Maturity assessments can help. And so there's a link there to a maturity assessment around digital transformation on the Global Government Forum website. And finally, sustainability in society. So designing good public services can definitely impact on the environment. There's maybe a good theme for a conversation there later. And finally, public services are the foundation of our societies. So when we get it right, our people thrive. And that's, for me, one of the key exciting things about being involved in public services is we're helping to support and define our societies. And with that, it's time for me to hand over to James.
David. Well, thank you so much. I love the way you ended there. When we get it right, our people thrive, because that kind of summarizes everything. But before we hand over to James, just to summarize, so really good to see that evolution where we started with, I think it's good to have that in mind, the dash for digital, our starting point, but actually we weren't really doing the deeper transformation behind on the processes. So then moving to think process first. Are you actually transforming the process itself? Great to have those 2 actual examples. So from Christchurch and from Brussels, showing how you can provide those updates of the process along the way to your citizens and really bringing in innovation and nuance, so you can nuance the delivery of your policies as well, making it fairer and targeting some of those interventions. And then loved your 4 things. So better experience for users, driving efficiency with your operating model, importance of innovation through technology, and then using these digital kind of approaches to link to that broader environmental agenda as well. So lots in there for our audience to think about already. Thanks, David. James, coming over to you now.
Hello, everyone. So I'm James Pitt. I'm from the UK Cabinet Office and the Central Digital Data Office. I'll take you through what that is in a second. I'm also going to talk you through what we're doing now. So David set me up really nicely talking about the history, and I'm going to take us through what the current focus is. So if we jump onto the next slide. So start with what is Central Digital Data Office. I think David even mentioned Government Digital Service there, but most people haven't heard about us. We separated from Government Digital Service a couple of years ago, and the idea was to create a central kind of unit designed to lead the digital and data function. And that's what we come in. So it's all about putting those right conditions in place. In real terms, what that means is we own the strategy, the standards, building capability all across UK government. Anything which helps make digital more embedded in service delivery and have a bigger impact, that's where we come in. And to do that, we've set up a new strategy. So jumping on to the next slide. So last year, we set up a new strategy with 6 missions. In there, it sets out 6 focus points we want the whole of government to focus on so that we really achieve the transformation we've been trying to get at. And it covers this 3-year period because that's the spending review, it's where the funding works. The first mission is where I spend all my time, and I'll come back to that one in a little minute. The other 5, just to mention briefly. So we have one login for government, which is all about improving access to digital services. So I'm having lots of different entry points, logins, etc. We have one routine. It brings all these different elements together. Third is all around better data. So David touched on this one. It's really important we make better use of the data we have. We have a lot of data. We could use it better. And that's what this mission is all about, putting in place those structures, tools, people, processes, all of those things so the data flows throughout these services. He also mentioned around sustainability. So building tags on having efficient, secure, and also sustainable technology throughout our services. That's one which hadn't been a big focus in the strategies before now, but really has been brought forward to put more focus. Skills is capability, nice and straightforward, you think. And then the final one is all around system reform. So delivering good services in government is actually really hard. I think a lot of people on this call are in there, and they would also say the same. System reform's all about trying to tackle some of the issues which make it hard. So tackling things like funding allocation, things like resourcing, commercial processes, the way we deliver and the approval cycles and all of those things. So trying to improve those foundations so that everything we do above that is smoother. Which sets up to my mission really well. So my mission, the first one, is all about transforming public services so they achieve better outcomes. If we jump onto the next one, underpinning that grand title is one very specific and actually very challenging commitment, which is that by 2025, we're going to get at least 50 of government's top 75 services up to a great standard. Now, when we committed to that, we didn't have a particularly clear idea of what the top 75 services are, so it was a bold start already. We also found very quickly that there wasn't a consistent measure of performance. I say found, we already knew it, but it became very, very real very quickly when we started digging into this. So the work all started by trying to figure out what the priority 75 are, and that's less than 1% of the services out there. We've got a mix of services, if you jump onto the next one, pulled from pretty much every department, tackling all different users, all different scales. You've got everything in there from universal credit, a huge benefits service, through to buying a fishing rod license, and that's not even the smallest one. So it's a real varied mix. We're also tackling different user groups. So there are citizens, there are businesses like waste carriers licenses, through to things like civil servant targeted ones. So we've got civil service jobs, pensions, learning, etc. So it's a real mix. And when you try and create a consistent method of measuring those services with such a broad range, it becomes really difficult. What we managed to get to is a core set, which I'll talk about in a minute. What we also had to do on top of that is figure out how we actually help them. So we knew we had some good services out there. We knew some of them might be great, but by definition of having this list, we knew a lot of them weren't. So they were going to need help. That's the final bit I'll talk through, which is what are we actually doing to help improve these services? So moving to this one very nicely, we have a framework which we defined. Now the framework is by definition intended to be simple. It's not as simple as it sounds, but that's where we started. So we start with quant metrics. The key premise here is that you need to measure services to know if they're actually working or not. That wasn't happening. Services would measure themselves, but there wasn't a consistent framework or approach. There also wasn't a definition of what good or great looks like. That's the big thing we've introduced here. So we start with those foundational quantitative metrics on the left-hand side. So 3 built around usability, 1 around efficiency, and 1 around compliance, which is things like accessibility, security, and those good things there. When we've got metrics for all of those, we can create a rating, so a very crude starting point of how the service is performing, whether it's great, good, or requires a burden, and that automatically brings out some of the common issues. So if a service has a really high cost per transaction, you know there's issues around efficiency. That usually leads to things like there's too much paper, or there's overly complex processes, or there's too much reliance on phone lines, etc. So we have that starting point. What we'll then do is really delve into each service. And that's understanding, well, does that baseline rating really reflect the quality of the service? Because it's rarely ever that simple. So we delve into that. We start to understand what problems they're facing, what's causing these metrics to be the way they are. What other metrics are happening there? So each of these services exists for a reason. When we say service, we mean the end-to-end. So it's there to help someone claim benefits, supports. It's helping someone pay a tax. Well, is it actually achieving that outcome? Because you can hit the metrics on the left without necessarily achieving that. But it's quite hard to measure policy success in a consistent way. We'll then also look at what other evidence is out there. These services are all high profile, high impact. A lot of them have had independent audits. They've had reviews along the way. In some cases, that's driven actions. In other cases, it hasn't. So we take all of that, bring it all together, and off the back of that, we then track and monitor each of these services. We view that every quarter. We collect data more often than that, but quarterly we update those. And as we're doing that, we're seeing this movement. So we've seen a lot of those initial services move very quickly up. We're now on the harder stretch where we have to get them over those much higher thresholds. So if we just jump on to my last slide, this is what it looks like in practice. So as well as tracking all the data and having all that relationship and getting all these services talking to each other, we'll also have to do a lot to monitor that. As we've seen throughout all this, services struggle to measure even those most foundational metrics. Some more than others. The small ones tend to find it a lot easier. The bigger ones find it really hard. When you're talking about true cost to serve for an end-to-end service, that requires lots of different units to come together. It requires costs from your digital areas, your operational areas, your policy areas, and actually bringing all that together has proven really difficult. So we've done a lot of help to help them close that gaps. Second is then actually helping them understand, well, what do the metrics mean? So if your usability is stuck at 60%, your user satisfaction, for instance, what does that mean? What do you do about that? How do you fix it? What have we seen work elsewhere? And what have we seen not work? So we can help guide them towards the right things. And part of that's around that third box on the right, which is around building this community. So within particular departments, so for instance, HMRC, the tax office, they would bring their service together, they'd talk to each other, but there wouldn't always be a great deal of collaboration between departments. So for instance, getting HMRC talking to, what's a better example? I can't remember their new acronym, BAYS, the business department. They change so often. So bringing them together so they actually talk about the end-to-end journeys rather than doing the individual elements. But also across the 75, getting the service owners, so the people who are accountable for these end-to-end services, to actually get up and talk about the work they're doing, not after they've done it, but as they're doing it, what issues they're facing, so they share that and learn from it along the way. That's the engagement half. The bottom half is where we actually get our hands dirty and get involved in improving these. So services, despite all the fantastic things they're doing, sometimes they need a bit more help. And that's where my wider team comes in. We drop in people to offer specialist advice, and this is where a lot of my work goes, to help them actually solve the particular problems they're facing. So bringing in those lessons learned from elsewhere, but also just delving into it with that outside eye, with that extra specialism, and help them solve those problems. That could be a bit of advice or guidance, pointing them on the right tracks. It could be more direct support and interventions. I'm sure in some of the questions I'll get into a couple of examples. In other cases, it's also about that innovation piece. So service teams focused on a particular service need to be really focused on the detail. They can't always really push the boat out and try something a bit more risky and innovative. And that's where we've come in. So that could be things like generative AI. We've done a few things there recently. It could be automation. It could be all the usual buzzwords you'll hear, but actually trying to apply in a real service live where people use it. That's probably enough for me just to explain where we are now. When we go into questions, I'll cover a few more examples, I'm sure.
James, thank you so much. Really interesting because it follows on from David so nicely. I mean, interesting to hear that even the top 75 services are less than 1% of the entire services. So this isn't going to be a quick fix to kind of get everything transformed, but really that focus on defining, even within those top 75, what does great look like then, and the importance of setting those standards. And then really what I took away from what you said, the importance of consistency then, working across the piece, of interoperability between all the different players in one kind of end-to-end service. Really good to hear how you're sharing the lessons learned along the way, sharing good practice, and then building that community. The importance of collaboration, I think it's interesting, building on what David was saying as well, that even though we're talking about digital transformation, so much of this is about people and culture change as well, and getting that communication going across there. And then again, picking up on what David has said as well, the importance of innovation and how your team can come in and help facilitate some of that innovation and taking some of those risks. Thanks so much, James. And you mentioned AI. We might have some questions on AI as well, I'm sure, when we come to the Q&A. Thank you. We've already got questions coming in, I'm just seeing, so please keep them coming in. And then after we've heard from Vigdis, we will come over to your questions. But Vigdis, over to you to hear what we're doing in Iceland.
Thank you. Just like to start saying it's so great to be with you here today, harnessing the digital potential of government. I decided to face the window, so when if a little darkness comes over me, I'm not moving over to the dark side. It's more to do with that we only have a few hours of daylight here in Iceland at this time of year. But I do always find it so fascinating that no matter where we are in the world, we have so much to share and learn from each other. I just learned that Christchurch, if I pronounce it correctly, has the same number of people as Iceland, but we have the same infrastructure needed as a much bigger country. And I really would love to compare our metrics with you, James, and share how we are building communities on this end. But if we start on the first slide, I just want to give you a little background on where I am coming from and the Digital Iceland environment. So Digital Iceland is set up as in many other countries, and was purposely built this way, taking in experiences from others. So Digital Iceland is part of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, and its role is to improve digital public service in cooperation with agencies and municipalities. So Digital Iceland follows the government digital policy and uses a multidisciplinary tender in development that includes 20 teams from 14 private companies. So we have the private industry working really tightly with us. That is why, though there are only 11 in the Digital Iceland team itself, there are about 250 in the Digital Iceland community that are contributing to everything that we do. So to the next slide, looking at our, what, how, and why, is that we aim to make people's lives easier by getting everyone on the same page, both then referring to the ideologically as well as Ísland.is website. So, and we do this by connecting the state, and that is, of course, connecting people, agencies through both human connection as well as APIs. And if we move to the next one, we have our 4 pillars that we aim for that are improving public service. We want to save time for people, because time is the most important thing that we own today. Time for people as well as agencies. We increase efficiency, and we have a positive effect on the environment. These are items that you don't often see as part of the same picture, but we have found it to be true when it comes to digitization. For next slide, please. We aim to approach our audience where they are in everyday life. So doing so in many different ways. One being where people are where they are in life. For example, learning how to drive or having a baby, and then we can, evaluate and approach things in that sense. By doing so, we are able to both connect better with the end user, as well as scope our work and keep focus. So as you have the 75 in the UK, we are focusing more on the life events. So we prioritize our work through life events. Which brings me to this, live events would be the first thing I would want to mention. And then the second would be trust, where we, if you go to the next slide, we build trust through our projects and the way we work. We have our values within Digital Iceland, where we work on being reliable, open, and we are the drivers of change. So what we create is not our private property, the property of Digital Iceland, but owned by all in Iceland, all agencies, all municipalities, all individuals. And we communicate that through the central platform of Ísland.is. So one single portal for all public service, similar to what you do in the UK, but in one place, both for individuals and businesses. And it is our mutual responsibility to contribute. So agencies have their own editorial access, and through constant user testing, the platform evolves. Trust also comes through the branding, and it's very important part of it, and the simple and accessible viewpoint of the user, though there are a lot of complexities behind it. If we can jump to the next slide. So as you can see here, we have both the Ísland.is app and then the website, and what the end user, what I am particularly proud of is all the complexities that you find in the background, but the end user just feels it very accessible and easy to use. The third thing that I wanted to mention is that we are is expectations. We are well on our way in digitizing the key live events, if you can put it that way. And we are very successful in many areas, but what we need to add to our very, very long list of projects is managing expectations. For when some services are now 100% digital, like going on parental leave in Iceland, that is, others have not been touched upon. So we try and manage expectation through constant communication. And finally, on my final slide, there is so much I could share with you, but I would like to leave one back, please. Like to leave you with what is perhaps the secret recipe to Iceland's success. We have, of course, the team and the knowledge that there lies behind that drive Digital Iceland, but the three ingredients I would really emphasize on is that that is having consensus across all political parties, that digital is the way forward in government services. So we also have consensus on sufficient funds to be invested in digital services, and we have the mandate in decision-making when it comes to digital services. So these three ingredients remove a lot of conversations and decisions off the table, allowing Digital Iceland to move as fast as it has in the last few years. So as James said, we are, the team drives for just making people's lives in Iceland, that is, and hopefully we can share in other places to make life easier, because we don't have a lot of time and we don't want to stand in line. We don't want to be driving between agencies. So just by simplifying things, we hope to contribute to a better life in Iceland.
Vigdis, thank you so much. I mean, really interesting, because there's lots of parallels, I think, between what we're hearing from Digital Iceland and what's been done in the UK. So, and you started with your motto, "We make your life easier," which is where David ended. So all about why do we do this? To make life better for the public, for the users. And you sit in the central unit, which is a bit like the CDDO from sounds of things, but you have a lot of private sector engagement with in your unit. And then focus on, so those two things that I think are different that you said you focus on. So one, you're focusing on through life events, those 12 life events that you've shown. That's how you've kind of decided to cut your focus. And then the real focus on trust as well, and how do you build trust. I thought that was really interesting. But similar to the UK, in that what the user then experiences is a one-shop stop, and the complexities are hidden behind the scenes, so that process is much smoother. And then two things at the end there, managing expectations. I think that might be interesting. I might have questions on that. So as you improve some services over here, I think the public's expectations of all their services being great are going to increase with speed. And then maybe something that I think we've already got questions on. So in Iceland, you've got the political consensus, so cross-party consensus that digital is important. So therefore you have the funding and you've got the clear mandate that you need to bring about change. Thank you so much, Vigdis, and thank you, David and James as well. As I thought, we've already got lots of questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to go straight to our audience questions, if that's okay. And the first one came in from John, and I like this because it's a very simple question in many ways, which is, what do you think are the main challenges facing governments in digitalising services? So John has said, is the main challenge, this is something you all mentioned, I think, getting different systems to talk to each other across departments, so that interoperability kind of challenge? Or do you think other challenges are bigger? So for example, do you think it's people and skills or resistance to change? What do you think are the really big challenges facing governments on this transformation journey? David, I'm going to come back to you because we haven't heard from you for a while.
Yeah, so just a quick one. So I think the systems are a challenge where you have very old systems. I think where you have newer systems, then most kind of new systems that will be used by the public sector are going to come with integration hubs. And so that makes it a lot easier. There's probably one area that I see in the UK that comes up quite a lot. And we did some research when I was in BusinessLink on this, which is data sharing. And there was some really interesting research that we did at the time, which was, you know, how would you feel? So we did research with citizens and businesses about how would you feel if government was sharing data about you to deliver better public services. And the comment that came back most was, what do you mean they're not?
Yeah.
There was like a moment of surprise. It was like, oh, we thought that was already happening. And I know in the UK there's been tremendous focus, and James, you'll be very close to this, on enabling a data sharing culture, a data sharing process, and also being smart about what data you need to share. So I think the good examples would be, you don't need to share everyone's personal data in order to say, are they entitled for a service? So it's possible to create integration between systems as a key part of the question, to say, you know, this service is only available to people who receive a certain type of welfare payment. Are they receiving that payment? You don't need to collect all of the data to work that out yourself. You can just go to the welfare system. Is this person receiving that particular benefit? So I think data sharing would be the one that I would highlight.
Thanks, David. James, do you agree with that, or do you see other challenges as well as being equally as significant?
So I definitely agree with those ones. I'd add a couple more. So one of the big ones we see every day is on prioritisation. So I mentioned top 5 is 1%, it's less than that. That means each department, each team is doing a lot of different things. So when you're actually trying to drive real change, you can't just focus on one thing as much as you'd like to. So actually trying to be really ruthless in the prioritisation, so that there's got a question around funding. So funding, resources, people are where you need them to be. That's a really common challenge, and that makes it a lot harder, particularly when, as you can imagine, the kind of priorities shift over time.
Yeah,
that's always tricky. The other one David touched on was on kind of all platforms and legacy technology. We do see that quite a lot. It's often not the hardest part of it. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of the time it's a business change. So those processes, which David talked a lot about earlier on, have been embedded for so many years. That's the way it's always been done. People have been trained on that. Actually cutting through why things are that way and realizing how they can be changed and then driving that change takes quite a long time. And I think that's the other big one, which makes it quite difficult.
Yeah, thanks, James. Vigdis, I'm going to ask you the same question, but I want to bring in, because I think it's really linked, a question from Seema Kaleng, who said, usually a process-centric approach requires an intensive change management effort. And in your experience, how is change management handled, and what were the challenges around it? And actually, those two questions are very similar, I think, aren't they? So is all of these challenges we're talking about, although we're coming at it through digital transformation, they are just actually about change, aren't they? And how do you make change happen?
Well, I think it's completely right. It's a huge change management project, just changing the way that people work every day. Even though people tend to be willing, it's just getting into your DNA, changing the way you work every day. So for us here in Iceland, we do, of course, have the same legacy system problem that I think every country has. And that's something that we need to work on. But in general, technology has been solved. So it's more about, from my point of view, it's more about people, and it's including the users and asking the users. For us that work within what we're doing every day, that work in digital, we tend to forget that our vocabulary kind of changes, and we just expect everybody to understand and know what they can expect. And for what I've found that just by including and empowering our co-workers within agencies and in other ministries, is that giving them the power of knowledge of being able to make decisions when it comes to digital. So you can't kind of see possibilities in the digital if you don't understand how it works. So you kind of can't imagine things, how you can solve everyday problems if you don't understand digital. And we are at the transformation phase. We have a lot of expertise, and then we have a lot of people that are really need to, we have a lot of legal work that needs to be changed as well. So that's something that we have been pushing for a lot. We only have one kind of law, even though we have a lot of regulations that are including digital, but there's one particular around our digital mailbox that is including digital in terms of how you receive important information from the government. So there's a lot of factors, but to put it short, I think it would be from our standpoint, it would be, we have the silos, we have the legacy systems, but we have to help the people. It's more about people than about technology. So change management is key here, and education.
Thanks, Vigdis. Yeah, so I think two big things have come out of that as well. In addition to the technology, you've got people and skills that they need in that education piece, but also what's come out interesting is legislation both as a blocker to change and innovation, but also less legislation needed to facilitate change. So that's coming out as well as one of the challenges. I'm going to move on to the next question. So this has come in from Habil Kantur, who said, when everything is digitized, what backup do you have to supply the public with services? So Habil has said, for example, in the case of a large kind of power outage, but also I would add in there, what backup do you have, for example, if you have large cyber attacks on your public services? So is there a risk as we digitalize more and more of our public services that they become vulnerable in new ways? And what's our kind of plan to have a backup for that? Vigdis, I'll change the order and I'll come back to you first.
Oh, okay. I guess, again, for me, our experience, for example, if I name a specific example, we have digitized our driver's license valid throughout Iceland. And we started just as, using it to be able to show because the police had scanners, but it wasn't in general use. But everybody is kind of used to using their driver's license to authenticate themselves. So what we tend to do is we have higher expectations on digital than we have on analog, on everyday life. So of course there are we have solved a lot of things and phishing and we have a lot of problems. A lot of phishing has been using, for example, our authentication or our login system that we have created. But people are learning. Again, it's about people and learning how to maneuver in the digital world, what to say okay to, what to click on. It's more in that sense, because we know how to solve this. We're trying to stay ahead of those who want to misuse the digital version of it. And of course, we need the laws and the regulations and have everything set up for this. But we have solved the technology, and we just need to implement it. But we need to teach the people how to maneuver. You know, those who really want to break into a bank, they will find a way to break into a bank. But we do have
so
security.
Vikas, if your system went down, if the digital system went down for applying for a driver's license, could people still revert back to a paper system? I think that was part of Habil's question. Is could you still have a digital backup, a paper backup?
Yes, so we have in Iceland about 95% of the working people have EID identification, so they can use and have digital, services. But we do want to make sure that it is a choice. So if we funnel the masses through the digital, you can always go and apply at the agency or through paper. So that is also an option. We want to have digital as an added service, but there's going to be a lot fewer people, lines at agencies where we had lines last year. By digitizing the services, there may be a few people waiting. So we've been able to improve it in that sense. But yes, it's the preferred version. Digital is preferred. It's digital first, but we are open to paper as well, even though I dream of a paper-free country.
Thanks, Vikas. David, your thoughts on this question about what backups do government need to have in place in case the digital systems kind of crash, I guess?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question. I think there are some things that you can do to manage the risk. And top of the list is think carefully about, as a public service organization, whether you run your own systems or you use systems in the cloud. And I think that my experience is that systems in the cloud can and typically are more secure than some public service organizations can give. I mean, there's obviously government departments and large public sector organizations who run, very secure services. But I think, software vendors like SAP provide a highly robust system with disaster recovery built in. So if something goes wrong with one particular node of the service provision, one technical node, other nodes kick in automatically, etc. So in that basis, I don't think, unless there's a very substantial event, in which case you probably wouldn't be worrying about public services, that, well thought through and technical public services and the technical provision of public services are going to go wrong, that is going to force you back to paper. If that makes sense, I think. But the key decision is, do you build it yourself or do you use cloud services? And my go-to would always be cloud services first. And that also is actually the policy of the UK government, interestingly enough.
Thanks, David. So James, on that note, did you have anything to add on kind of, the vulnerabilities and how do you mitigate against something happening to your digital services?
I think we've covered the resilience part pretty well already, especially in terms of technology. The key thing I think to remember this is we're usually not talking about digital exclusive, at least not in our world. We talk about digital by default. It's the old phrase we used to say all the time. And that doesn't mean there's only digital route. There is often a non-digital route. That's two reasons. One, it gives you that resilience security, but the bigger reason is there's always going to be a proportion of the population who aren't online, they're digital excluded for one reason or another. So we do have assisted digital routes, we have offline routes, and they're there for those sections of society. So they're not excluded, they're not disadvantaged. They're also there from a resilience point of view. So if that kind of doomsday scenario, which we've kind of just talked about how we'll make sure it doesn't happen, and there is a huge amount of work to make sure that doesn't happen. But even if it did happen, it's not like the world stops. There is a mechanism and there are continuity plans in place for services.
Thanks, James. That actually leads on nicely to a question that's come in from Yilmaz, who said, do any of our speakers have any lessons or insights to share in creating single access points, so digital single access points for specific groups? So, for example, people new to digital services, minorities, elderly people, or any other kind of group. So this is an inclusion question, but not for people who don't want to go digital. This is inclusion for people who do want to go digital, but might have some specific challenges or issues in doing so. David, I'll come to you first on this one.
Yeah, big fan of doing that where it makes sense. And it's the equality for all kind of point here is government and public service has a responsibility to meet people where they are, rather than say, you know, it's our way or the highway. The thing that I was massively impressed with the formation of GDS that they did really well, that I think is critical to this, is user research. So I think absolutely crucially, if you're going to go down that route, engage with the communities you're hoping to serve and find out what they want and need, and then provide services on that basis. So yeah, user research driven, I think it's an incredibly valuable tool in the toolkit for providing those sort of digital single access points for different communities.
Thanks, David. And James, is that inclusion part of the what great looks like, kind of when you're coming to measure services?
Yeah, it is. So we bake that in. It's baked into the service standard, which is what governs how we build new services. It's built into how we handle great services, built into everything. And that's really important. So it's make sure that we are designing for everyone. I think what's interesting in that question, you talked about single access points, and it's interesting. I don't think we do that. And I think that's an intentional decision. We design services so that anyone could use them. Rather than, if I'm reading the question maybe a bit too literally, we don't create an access point for different groups, so each one has the same experience to an equally good quality. Now, obviously, there are differences, so we design for accessibility, and that means there is a different experience, but it should be equivalent. And as much as possible, we design so that everyone gets that. So that could be simple things like mobile first, so it's designed to be responsive. So whether you're on a device versus a mobile, you get an equivalent experience, even though it's different. So I think that's part of this. The other bit, just tee up someone else to speak, is I think this also feeds into life eventing. So Victor has mentioned it. We've done a little bit of thinking about this. How do you join up services so that people in those kind of entry points, those groups, those experiences, have a kind of nice flow through services rather than this staggered steps which used to happen.
Thanks, James. Vigdis, I'm coming to you on the inclusion one, and we've had a kind of follow-up question really, which is from Mike Coppola, who said, digitizing services is a cost saving, but how do you deal with people who are not computer literate, such as the elderly, to help to get them to use systems versus dealing with the cost of having a physical person that they can interact with?
Well, I guess it links a little bit with what I said earlier. By decreasing the lines at agencies, the people working there are able to provide a lot better service to those who need or decide that they want analog services, if analog is the right word for it. I don't like putting it in age groups, or because I know a lot of elderly people that are very tech savvy, and I know people around in their 40s and 50s who need assistance just dialing or using the internet on a mobile phone. So I really prefer thinking about, as James was mentioning, that we're within life events. So in that area, we're able to use the research very well to understand where the groups are, and we can then scale it and to start with we'll say 80% of the mass, and then adding onto it slowly but surely until we have everybody that really wants digital services. So it's interesting that in Iceland, our digital policy, the digital policy of the Icelandic government and municipalities, is that it is digital for everyone that wants it. So it is our obligation to figure out how everybody can use it. We are at the advantage of having the EID, as I mentioned earlier. So we can use that, but we also at Digital Iceland, we have a very firm content strategy, design system, as well as accessibility policy in terms of, so we are using the inclusion there, making sure that everybody understands what what they are accepting and making information really accessible for people. So, and this we have even taken into how agencies, we moved internally within agencies where we help them rethink their services. So why are you asking these questions when they are not applicable to this type of service? You already have this information and things like that. So I guess it's always making people first, not the system. So we're not transforming the way things have been done for tens of years. There's a reason these questions were asked somewhere along the way, but they are not relevant perhaps today. So being agile and moving forward.
But again, it's coming back to that, think about the process first before you do anything else.
Yes.
Thanks, Vic. Just for the audience, in case you don't, the EID is a digital ID that you have in Iceland, which is very different, I think, James and Dave, from other countries. And in the UK, we don't have a digital ID. So that's a whole nother webinar, I think, the
is.
kind of digital ID. We've still got lots of questions to get through. I'm going to go to Ahmed's question, because data came up, I think, in the opening presentations as well. And Ahmed has asked, as data quality and data trust are critical for operation and analytical activities, his questions are we in the public sector having trouble finding the data that we need? And how do we address the data access issue? David, I'll start with you on this. So you mentioned quite a bit about the importance of data, I think, getting the right data. So do you think the public sector has trouble getting the data that it needs and then sharing that data, getting access to that data and sharing it with each other across government?
Yeah, I think it's always going to be a challenge. And the reason why it's always going to be a challenge in public sector is the scope of public services. So if we take a local government organisation in the UK, they typically deliver about 600 separate services. Amalgamating data across that obviously can be done, but there's a question there around purpose. What is the purpose? Some of the larger systems that we provide as an organization. So we have a specialist area of our organization that provides services and software into tax agencies. And when you look at some of the data requirements there, every single access to every single record is tracked. And again, it's to make sure that, if people are accessing data as public servants or as anyone else, they have a reason for accessing that data. They're not kind of just data surfing and going, let's have a look around and see what's what. So I think it is an issue. I think there are lots of technical solutions. You have the concept of data warehouse, business warehouses that have been around for some time, which are amalgamating data from different systems. But at the heart of it is the purpose of bringing the data together, the permissions that you have from the citizens to bring and use that data for whatever purpose you're using it for, and the protections of that data on behalf of the people whose data it is.
Thanks, David. And Victis, you said that Digital Iceland, you're very open about what you do, open and transparent about what you do. Does that include how you use people's data? And does that mean in Iceland people are comfortable with the way the government shares their data?
Oh, absolutely. I guess we have, in general, we have trust that the government is not misusing people's data. And I think it was mentioned earlier that it's more surprising to people that all agencies don't have all the information, that they are built in silos. So we have the problem, even for us, our little country, we have over 230 agencies and municipalities, and they all have their backend systems where they, store the data. And I think it's how, getting, we have solved, like David mentioned, we have a lot of technical solutions, but we need to get to a place and a platform where we can share this data. Many of them are old and can't handle the, cloud, can't handle cloud solutions. We are cloud-based at Digital Iceland, but we need to be realistic and be a little bit hybrid at the moment to be able to really securely share things. But we need to be able to simplify how data is shared. For example, in our application system that we have built, we do at the first screen, we share with the user, this is the information we are collecting from tax. This is the information we're collecting from Register Iceland, and things like that. So we're trying to use this digital transformation and educating the user as well, to just really thinking about, because who doesn't just click on, accept cookies without reading all the GDPR? Because it's a long, long list. And instead, you kind of need to move this around and say, start using cookies again, in a sense that, well, not cookies, but just as a rhetorical, to be able to get people to really think about that I'm taking this information to be able to improve this service or to be able to send you this email. Just being open and honest about what we're about to do with things. And I think that comes into the trust building again.
Thanks, Vigdis. James, you mentioned as well the point Vigdis made there, that people seem to be surprised that government isn't sharing already more of their data. And yet, isn't it true that research shows that when you ask people if they trust government to share their data, they're slightly reluctant, far more reluctant than they would be with a private sector organisation? Do you agree with Vigdis? Maybe that comes down to lack of communication about the benefits of sharing the data. Why do you think people are reluctant to do that?
I think that's part of it. I think there's always just a bit of a nervousness if you can't be specific how it will be used. It's understandable that people will be nervous, because if you say government, you talk about it as if it's one entity, as kind of Vigdis touched on. It's an enormous beast. It does everything you could possibly imagine in all different worlds. When we talk about data sharing, if you gave them a kind of carte blanche, your data could be used anywhere. Now, I don't think that's what anyone really suggests or wants. It's talking about how do you explain to people how we would use your data in your interests to make it a more smooth journey. And that's a really hard thing to do. It requires a lot of structural change. It requires a lot of that foundational work to make it so we've got stewardship, we've got mastering of data, you've got kind of transparency in that. And that's hard. It takes a long time. But in doing so, you then build the trust. So it's got to be a kind of gradual journey.
Thanks, James. I want to go on to Renee's question, which is, I like this. Have you seen a reduction in jobs because of digitalization? And I want to link that with a question that we had in advance, which was, and it comes back to, you mentioned AI, James. To what extent do you think that AI is going to change the kind of digital transformation landscape? So I want to put those two together, because when we talk about AI, people always say, are we going to lose jobs because of AI? It's going to take away a lot of our jobs. So has digitization already led to job reduction in the public sector? And do you think AI and other new technologies will, if it's not already happened, lead to job losses or changes in jobs, maybe is the better way to look at it? Vigdis, you're nodding there. Your thoughts on this?
I was going to let the boys start and then build on it. No, I think this is a really hot topic. It's a kind of the elephant in the room that a lot of people think about, and I think this is the number one reason why I at least have experienced resistance working with agencies. People, when they don't completely understand what's about to happen, they are a little bit afraid of what's going to happen to my job. Because they can't visualize. This is also new, that they don't visualize how is my life going to look like after everything has been digitized. So we need to use this opportunity to educate and help people in this transformation. We are perhaps going to be have need for less front service people, and people will be able to use chatbots and service a lot more people than answering phones and things like that. But we can very easily educate these people, because harnessing the power of the mind and the power of people in learning how to, we have people within health that have their education background in health, that have become leaders within digital and digitizing services within health industry. So we have the capabilities of learning new things, and it starts with us, and then we teach the AI, and the AI takes over some part of it, and then we learn some more, and I think this in that sense. But jobs are going to be changing, that's for sure. But I don't see any decrease. What I've seen at this point is a lot better service. What's really good service. Taking for I'm talking a lot, but taking a short example would be we have seen from around 200 days of just finalizing someone's will after someone's died, or has gone from about 200 days down to around 20 days. So for their living relatives, it's a lot. The improvements are enormous.
Yeah.
But we still see the same amount of people. The pile that the people need to work through is just not as large.
Great, thanks, Vigdis. James, you're nodding there. Do you agree then that the nature of the work will change, but overall we probably won't see a reduction in the number of staff?
Yeah, I do. I think the key thing we see with this, both digitalization and AI, is all about trying to take away the mundane administration so we can focus more on that value adding into action. If I can also squeeze an example, there's a piece of work we've been doing at the minute with one service, who I won't name, but have a really complicated legislation and policy background. And before we got there, their caseworkers were spending hundreds of days working through the legislation, the guidance, to make a decision on an application. What we've been able to do is introduce what's been called an AI-powered assistant for them, which can then do all that trawling for them. They take the question, we use a large language model to interpret it, strip out the relevant bits, and then guide them straight to it. In doing so, it means that those caseworkers are still there, they're still doing the same amount of work, but they're spending more time on the conversation with the person doing the application, with the kind of real situation they're in. And this is a sensitive situation, so that's really valuable. As a consequence of that, it means we've shaved, we will shave about 80 to 100 days off that process, which is wonderful. But it also means the quality and the depth is far higher. So that's a kind of specific example where you can see this work.
Thanks. I do have one final round of questions. One question I want to put to all of you, but very quickly, David, on this, in terms of kind of AI and removing jobs and everything, Aritra has followed up with, where does new tech like AI fit into this space? And how do you evaluate the return on investment for things like AI? So how do we know that it's actually improving kind of efficiency in public services?
So technology is an evolving space. And so one of the comments I was going to make about jobs is, from my career, if I look back on my career in technology, the number of times I've had to retrain, it's just a constant process, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I think the impact of these new technologies is relatively straightforward to understand. There's a complexity around AI that I'll introduce as well. But it's basically the ability to take what you do today, benchmark it, apply the new technology, and evaluate what the difference would be, whether that's efficiency, customer satisfaction. So there are a whole load of different areas that you could review. The thing that I think about that is difficult about AI, that definitely needs to be taken into account, is if you're building your own AI as opposed to using some pre-existing model, then you're in a probabilistic scenario. So if I take an example, so there's one tax agency that we're working with who've now refined their predictive model for local government taxes to say that they can detect about 70% of people who are going to struggle to pay their taxes before they actually start to struggle. That may be about as high as you can get it. So when you're designing services around artificial intelligence, there's a sort of an automatic assumption sometimes to say we're gonna make it 100%. The AI is going to sort us out, and we're going to get it right every time. To use James's point, the AI will read the document coming in and be able to figure out what needs to be done. But it's much more complicated than that. And so I think you have to take into account with AI the fact that it's not as smart as perhaps we would hope it is. And therefore, that when you're calculating the return, you have to calculate it on the likely outcome of the impact of the AI, which typically means using test data sets, etc., to figure that out. But yeah, technology constantly changing, very exciting place to be.
Thanks, David. And this is the final question, and I'm just looking at the time. We've only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to have to ask you all to be quite quick with your answer to this one. But right at the beginning, I said one of the biggest challenges for the public sector is financial constraints. Despite Vigdis, I know you said that you at least have the kind of consensus for funding underpinning this, but I really like Brittany's question because I think it's just a very straightforward question. Is funding ever an issue when you're digitizing services? And if so, how do you combat this issue to produce efficient and sustainable digital service? So essentially, how do we do all of this in the public sector when we have such limited resources to be able to do these transformation programs? David, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so that's the perfect question for me as a value advisor. So my role is to help organizations figure out how to justify investments in technology. And so I think the key thing there is understanding why you're doing it. And if the drivers are financial, understanding what the benefits are that will be delivered and how quickly they will be delivered, and being realistic about creating that financial profile. The thing that I would say is that public services have so much potential to do good that it's worth thinking sometimes beyond the financial. I know we all live in a world where finances are important, but if we focus on how to maximize the good that the public services can deliver within the envelope of resources that we have, then I think we'll be in a better place. But really great question. Thank you.
Thanks, David. James, then the same question to you. How do we do this when we have such limited money available?
So being brief is always challenging. I'll pick two things. One, I mentioned prioritization before. We can be really ruthless about both in terms of what we do and how far we go with it. So minimum viable products, in the truest sense, it's very easy to inflate a scope. It's very hard to be strict on prioritization, but that's where the real impact and value is. So that's one. The other half question talked about sustainability, and I think that's really important. The place I often see funding go wrong is you'll get the funding to deliver something to make it better, but then it'll stagnate because there hasn't been that kind of ongoing investment to do the continuous improvement, because that's often a harder thing to sell and to make the case for. But if you don't do that, that's where most of the non-great services, that's how they've got there, because they lost that investment pot, they lost that long-term commitment. And the result, they stagnated and became less and less relevant over time. So making the case for that is really key.
Thanks, James. Vigdis, final thoughts from you. How do we do all of this in a limited kind of budget envelope?
Yeah, well, I did say earlier that we are lucky that within the government, Iceland has seen the light in terms of the return on investment in terms of digital. The thing that we need to focus on is, things are moving fast, and we kind of tend to forget how things used to be and what we have today. And what we have done is that we have piled up. Everything's moving fast, so we're calculating and piling up. What are we doing? What can we use the money at least for new things that we can use the money for that used to go into old things. And we could tend to forget to think about, paper and printing and how much pens and writing and sending documents between places. These are kind of costs that we have that are so normalized for us that we have forgotten how much they really do cost. And for example, we have the criminal record is digitized in Iceland, as probably in many places, and it takes about 17 seconds for it to come through to your digital mailbox, and you have to you pay for each time you need it. There was a 30% increase between years, and it was no impact for the agency because it was everything was manual. It used to be that you had to drive to the district commissioners, wait in line, wait for paper printed. So when you calculate your time and the time of the employer, typing everything up, it is the return on investment is so huge because In today's time, not badly worded, time is our most valuable thing. We need more time to be able to do things, and it is also an equality issue, because who is it that usually needs to be applying for all sorts of things, and it's usually those that have single parents, or those that don't have the ability to be able to take time off work and things like that. So it's we need to just have the right focus on how we can support each group in that sense.
Thanks, Vigdis. So a kind of real argument for making the business case, that broad business case. And I think you've gone some way to answering Jose's question as well about what evidence is there to show that efficiencies can be gained through digitization. We are out of time, I'm afraid. We had so many great questions in from the audience. So thank you so much to the audience. We've got through almost all of them. There are a couple we haven't got through, so I might kindly ask if our great panelists don't mind, maybe we can make sure those questions are answered behind the scenes after the webinar. But sadly, we are out of time. Thank you so much. That was a brilliant conversation. Thank you to James, to David, and to Vigdis, for all of you for lending us your time and your expertise today. And thank you to SAP and DXC Technology for being our great knowledge partners as well. Just to say to the audience, thanks for those questions. If you want to, we will be sending around a link with the video from today's webinar. So if you missed any of it, or if you want to share it with your colleagues, you will be able to do that. That will be coming to you very shortly. And also there will be a write-up of today's webinar with all of the key points that were made, and that will come around in a week or so's time. So it will be an article as well. And again, you can share that with your networks. But that just leaves me to say thank you so much to our audience, but also to our fantastic panel today. Thanks for everything. And I hope that we've left everybody with that message, I think, which I really took out from this, that this is all about making lives better for the public and for our citizens. And I think that came through really clearly today, as well as the fact that it's not just technology, but it's people that are going to make this change happen. Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are, and I hope to see you on another one of our webinars very soon. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.